Many believe that to advance you must speak more, show more, impress more. They think success is found in immediate recognition, in sharing each step, each goal, each idea, but that weakens them, because when everything is said, energy is dispersed, and when one seeks constant validation, direction is lost. I, Brian Tracy, have learned that true transformations happen in silence, that real power is built away from the spotlight, in absolute focus and in consistent action. You don't need to announce your moves. You need to execute with precision, because while others talk, you advance. While others expose, you build. And while others get distracted, you become unstoppable. Silence is not absence. It is strategy. It is self-mastery. And he who masters silence masters his life. The first principle I discovered on this silent path was that external noise is the greatest trap for the man who wants to advance, because we live in a culture that rewards the one who speaks fast, who shouts loudest, who publishes each step as if the value of his process depended on others' applause. And meanwhile, the true builders are in silence, working, refining, executing, without giving explanations, because they learned that energy is not wasted in demonstrating, but in advancing, they learned that words often dilute power, but silence concentrates it. For years I was a slave to the need to tell my ideas. As soon as I had a plan, I wanted to share it. As soon as I felt progress, I sought validation. I believed that by speaking of my goals I made them more real, but in time I understood I was seeking approval, not commitment, and that every time I spoke of what I wanted to achieve without having worked on it in silence, I lost internal strength. I felt exposed, scattered, even guilty for not fulfilling what I announced. Because when one speaks before executing, one no longer acts from conviction, one acts from pressure. Silence, on the other hand, returned power to me. I began to be quieter, to observe more, to let my actions speak for me, to shut my mouth and open my eyes, to use the time I once used explaining, in doing, and that change transformed everything. My days became more focused, my mind clearer, my environment cleaner, because silence also serves as a filter. It drives away those who are only there out of curiosity and attracts those who value coherence above spectacle. In that silence I discovered my true rhythm. I stopped looking at what others do, stopped comparing myself, stopped running to reach an image. I became the owner of my process. I stopped feeling obligated to justify my decisions. I learned to enjoy anonymity, momentary invisibility, the peace that comes from knowing I am building something real, even if no one sees it yet, because silent growth is the most solid. It needs no adornments. It needs no adornments. It only needs discipline. And the most powerful thing was this. Silence forced me to listen to myself, to stop talking and start understanding why I did what I did, to ask myself if my actions were aligned with my values, to stop acting on impulse or for image. I started moving with purpose, because when one stops making noise, one starts hearing one's intuition, and that voice, though soft, is firm. And when one follows it, one no longer needs the world's noise to feel secure. The strength of silence is not passive, it is strategic. It does not mean hiding, it means preparing, focusing, caring for the process, because the man who does not announce his steps walks more firmly. And that man, when he arrives, needs to explain nothing, because his mere presence confirms he did not come to convince anyone. He came to fulfill what he set out to do, without shortcuts, without exhibitions, only with focused discipline and a silence that makes him unstoppable. The second principle I forged on this path was understanding that focus is a superpower that most despise. Because everyone wants to advance, everyone wants extraordinary results. But few are willing to close doors, to say no, to choose one single thing and become absolutely lethal in it. The world is full of people with good intentions, with multiple talents, with many ideas, but without results, because they jump from one thing to another, get distracted by the shiny, get lost in the new. Do not finish what they start, do not sustain what they choose, and without focus everything dilutes. I lived like that for a long time, always starting, always excited by the new. But each new project was a way to avoid deep commitment to the previous one. an excuse not to face the discomfort of prolonged execution. And that kept me busy, but not productive. I felt tired, but not advanced. I was trapped in a silent trap doing much without getting anywhere. And it was there I understood that focus is not just a tool, it is an identity decision. I decided then to choose one thing, one goal, one direction, and pour all my energy into that. Not a little each day, but everything. Without a plan B, without distractions. Without allowing my mind to sabotage me with new idea decision. Mid-process, I became brutally selective with my time, my habits, my thoughts, because I understood the human mind can do incredible things. But it cannot do everything at the same time. The man who wants to cover everything ends up sustaining nothing, and focus, when it becomes a habit, transforms everything because you stop feeling that anxiety of missing out. You stop jumping from stimulus to stimulus and start entering a state of depth where time expands, clarity sharpens, and results multiply. What used to take days you achieve in hours. What once confused you now resolves with a single glance, because your mind is no longer fragmented, it is aligned. But for that you have to pay the price. Get bored, resist novelty, become uncomfortable with slowness. Because focus is uncomfortable at the start. It has no fireworks, no instant dopamine. It has repetition, it has commitment, it has silence. And that is why it is so powerful, because no one else sustains it. Because in a world seeking speed and variety, you choose depth and direction. And that makes you an anomaly, makes you dangerous, because when a focused man appears, everything around him adjusts. Everything unnecessary falls away. Everything superficial is exposed because his mere presence demonstrates that yes, it is possible. Yes, one can build without haste, without distraction, without noise. Focus taught me to resist the temptation of the next thing, to stay with the chosen, to stay, to perfect, to deepen. And in that process I became another person, clearer, firmer, more effective, because true greatness is not achieved by trying everything, it is achieved by mastering the essential. And that mastery does not happen amid noise. It only appears when you have the courage to close all doors but one, and turn that door into your entrance to the world you want to build. The third principle that forged my character was to execute without permission, without waiting for approval, without asking for validation. Because I discovered most people do not fail from lack of talent or ideas, they fail from lack of sustained action. They have the knowledge, they have the vision, they even have the desire, but they do not act. They hold back doubt, wait for the perfect moment, wait to have more clarity, wait to feel more ready, but that moment never comes, because action is not the result of confidence, it is the cause. I also fell into that trap. I planned, read, trained, shared my goals, but I did not act with the intensity my vision demanded. I justified myself with elegant phrases. I am waiting for the best moment. I want to have everything well organized before starting. I need to make sure it is the right path. But deep down I was afraid of failure, afraid of being judged, afraid of advancing without the backing of others, and that fear disguised itself as prudence. But it was cowardice. Until one day I got tired. I got tired of being a spectator of my own potential. I got tired of seeing how others with less preparation achieved more than me, simply because they acted, and I decided to execute without having everything clear, without waiting for the environment to support me, without waiting for others to understand my process. And that is where my true transformation began, because I understood that movement generates clarity, that advancing, even with doubts, is better than staying in the paralysis of perfection. I started to act every day, not with violence, but with firmness, not with anxiety, but with urgency, because I understood time is not recovered, that each day without action was a day I gifted to mediocrity, and action, when it becomes a habit, changes everything. It changes how you see yourself, it changes how the world perceives you, changes your external reality, because you are no longer imagining, you are building. Execution is not glamorous. It is uncomfortable, tiring, repetitive, but it is the only way to materialize what you carry inside. Ideas are worthless if not translated into action. Potential is useless if not converted into results. And dreams do not survive if not fed with movement. That is why today I do not do what I feel. I do what I must, because I learned not to trust my passing emotions, but my firm decisions. And if you ask me the exact moment my life began to turn, I would tell you it was when I stopped waiting, when I stopped asking for permission, when I stopped seeking guarantees and simply started to execute with fear, with doubts, with imperfection, but with decision. Because power lies with the one who does, who builds in silence, who, without saying anything, appears one day, with the results in hand, and that man needs no explanations, because the one who executes does not compete. He simply arrives. Silence, focus, and sustained execution not only transform what you do, they transform who you become. And the fourth principle that changed me inside was understanding that I do not need to share my progress for it to be real, because we live trapped in a culture of constant exposure, where every small step seems to need witnesses, reactions, applause. But that does not build results. It only feeds the ego, and a satisfied ego is the enemy of silent progress, because when you share too soon, you can get trapped in the image of someone who is advancing instead of truly continuing to advance. For years, I myself fell into that cycle. I uploaded a gym photo before my body changed. I published a goal as soon as I wrote it. I announced projects I hadn't even started. And the worst part, upon receiving attention, I already felt satisfied, as if just by showing intention I had already fulfilled. But I had fulfilled nothing. I was deceiving myself, because external validation can become a drug that prevents you from seeing what you have not yet built. Applause does not mean advance. Reaction does not mean result. Only constant and silent action takes you to the place you truly belong. I then started to keep my progress, protect my plans, build as if no one was watching, because I understood that what is private strengthens, that when something is in its most vulnerable stage, what it needs is not exposure. What it needs is not exposure. It is care. It is focus. It is silence, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Not out of insecurity, but out of wisdom. Because when one speaks, one listens less. When one shows less, one perfects more. And when one moves away from noise, one gets closer to the truth. And it was not easy. Sometimes I felt the temptation to share, to prove I was doing something, to demonstrate I was growing. But I resisted, and in that act of resistance, my character became firmer. I learned to sustain my process in solitude, not to seek witnesses, to be enough for myself, and in that internal space I found a new confidence. Not the one that comes from being seen, but the one born from knowing oneself to be committed. That is the confidence that does not break, that does not depend on looks, that does not need filters, that does not fade when no one applauds. And if you are here listening to this, it is because deep down you know that your best version does not need to be announced. It needs to be built day by day, step by step, without distractions, without interruptions, without the urgency to show. Because what you are building is bigger than any post. It is your identity, your vision, your entire life. And that does not need publicity. It needs silence, presence, and daily execution. Subscribe if this is touching you. This channel is for those who choose to build without noise, who advance with intention, who do not need to be seen to feel valuable. And leave me one thing in the comments. What is that goal you are building in silence without anyone knowing? Write it, reaffirm it. This space is yours, because when you write it with decision, you have already started to turn it into reality. The fifth principle I strongly integrated into my life was the art of listening with intention. And I do not mean listening to respond, to debate, to correct, but to listen to understand, to listen to absorb, to listen to grow, because in a world where everyone wants to talk, the one who knows how to listen becomes invincible. Most people do not listen. They wait for their turn to speak, interrupt, get ahead, impose their vision, believe their opinion is more valuable than others' experience. And that is why they do not learn. That is why they do not evolve. Because he who does not listen repeats, and he who repeats stagnates. I was like that for a long time. I thought I already knew, that I didn't need advice, that I was right, and in that pride disguised as security I was closing doors, distancing myself from learning, from opportunities, from real connections, until I stopped and decided to change my attitude. I decided to be quieter, to open up more, to truly listen, not only to more successful people, but to anyone who had a story, a wound, a different perspective, because I understood that every human being carries a lesson and that he who has closed ears is missing the map that could save him years of mistakes. Listening with intention taught me to see beyond words, to recognize the pain behind criticism, the fear behind pride, the wisdom behind a simple story. It taught me to stop imposing my ideas and start nourishing them with different points of view. I realized that what I needed most was not to have the last word, but to ask the right question, because person not question. Transformation does not start with a declaration. It starts with an honest question, and that question is often born from listening to what one avoided hearing. Silence also became my ally in conversations. I no longer need to fill every space. I no longer seek to prove anything. I let the other express themselves, empty out, reveal what they normally wouldn't say. Because when you don't interrupt, when you listen without judging, the other lowers their defenses. And in that moment the connection becomes real. And what you discover in that shared silence can change you more than 1,000 pieces of advice. But this habit also has an internal dimension. Learning to listen to myself, learning to read my emotions, to question my reactions, to understand where my thoughts come from, because often we speak to silence what we feel, and when we are quiet, those emotions come to the surface, not to destroy us, but to be seen. And in that internal observation, one begins to know oneself, to see oneself with more compassion, to correct oneself with more precision. Today I listen more than I speak. I listen to grow. I listen to serve. I listen so as not to forget that I do not know everything, that there is always more to learn, to improve, to discover. Because the man who listens adapts, refines himself, becomes wise. He does not need to shout to impose. His mere presence transmits clarity. And when he speaks, he does not do so from the need to be heard, but from the certainty of having understood. This habit taught me that one does not need to speak loudly to be respected. One needs to listen deeply to be transformed. And if you practice it, if you quiet down a bit more, if you observe, if you open space, you will see how the world begins to teach you everything you need to know. All it takes is silence, humility, and the decision to learn without having to dominate. Because sometimes the greatest power is in saying nothing and absorbing everything. The sixth principle I rooted as a habit was to protect my decisions from others' opinions, because nothing dilutes a man's clarity faster than constantly exposing himself to the voices of those who do not live his process. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone suggests, everyone projects their fears, checks their fears, and their limits as if they were absolute truths, and if one is not strong, if one is not defined inside, one ends up adapting one's path to please expectations one does not even share. One ends up changing direction, not because something is wrong, but because someone else does not understand it. For a long time I was vulnerable to that. I would start with enthusiasm, with vision, with focus, and as soon as someone questioned my decision, I would begin to doubt. I wondered if it made sense, if I was exaggerating, if I should change route, not because there were real reasons, but because I could not stand the judgment, the mockery, the skeptical look. I wanted to advance without being criticized, without bothering. But I discovered that is impossible, because every firm decision, every own path is uncomfortable. Bothers the one who does not dare, irritates the one who abandoned their process, awakens discomfort in the one who lives justifying their mediocrity. It was then that I made a radical decision. My decisions would no longer be democratic. They would no longer be subjected to voting, nor to public discussion, nor to unnecessary debate. I learned to be quieter and decide with more firmness, to sustain my direction even when others did not understand it, because purpose is not explained. It is sustained, and he who is truly committed to his vision stops losing energy trying to convince. He simply acts, and the results with time become the only necessary explanation. This habit taught me to value my own judgment, to trust my intuition, my experience, my preparation, not from arrogance, but from responsibility, because it is my life, my consequences, my path. And I cannot allow those who will not bear my results to decide for me. So today, I listen to advice only from those who are where I want to be. Only from those who have walked with pain, with discipline, with coherence. I do not listen to opinions from those who only observe, criticize, or speak from fear. I also learned to keep silent about important decisions, not to announce changes until I see them executed, not to tell plans until I have materialized them, because I understood that the more exposed a decision is, the more vulnerable it is to dilution. Because every opinion, every doubt sown can halt momentum if one is not completely firm. And that firmness is built in silence, in intimacy, in the internal conversation where there is no external noise contaminating the path. Today, every time I make an important decision, I ask myself this question: am I choosing this because it feels right, or because someone else expects it from me? And if the answer is not mine, I discard it, because I no longer live to please or to calm expectations. I live to build a life in coherence, and that inevitably bothers. But it also liberates, because when you stop asking for permission to be yourself, everything else adjusts. Whoever must stay, stays. Whoever does not, leaves. And what remains is a life built with intention, with courage, and with absolute silence towards the voices that no longer have power over you. The seventh principle I installed as an unbreakable habit was eliminating the excess of explanation, because one of the greatest drains of energy in the life of a man committed to his growth is the constant impulse to justify each step, each decision, each change. Explaining why he didn't go out, why he changed course, why he distanced himself, why he is no longer available. But the truth is this: you owe no explanations to those who do not walk with you. You do not need permission to protect your energy. You do not need to justify your transformation. For years, I fell into the trap of over-explaining. I felt guilt saying no, fear of being misunderstood, insecurity when standing firm. So I spoke too much. I tried to make others understand. I went out of my way to convince, to show my intentions were good, but in the end, none of that worked, because he who wants to understand does not need many words, and he who does not want will never understand even if you explain 1,000 times. And in that process, I wore myself out. I lost strength. I weakened myself with each unnecessary explanation. I learned that internal clarity does not need to be defended, that when one is truly aligned with one's truth, one can keep silent without feeling. One is hiding. One can withdraw without giving speeches. One can act without narrating. Because the mature man does not seek approval. He seeks congruence. He does not need spectators to feel firm. He has already chosen himself, already defined himself, and from there he acts with power, with sobriety, with silent authority. Eliminating excess explanation also helped me clean my environment. Those who truly respected my process never demanded explanations. They simply observed and accompanied. The others distanced themselves, criticized, became uncomfortable, but that was not a problem. It was a natural purification. Because he who needs to control your path does not love you, he conditions you, and he who truly respects you does not need to understand each decision. He only needs to see you at peace. This habit taught me to trust more in my internal word than in external reactions, to let my actions speak, to let time be my ally. Because the man who executes with discipline has no time to debate with those unwilling to build, and when someone demands unnecessary explanations from me, I simply respond with presence, not with arguments, because I have nothing to prove. And that over time becomes a force that intimidates. Because in a world addicted to justification, he who is silent and advances shines with an intensity no one can extinguish. Today I move with a simple rule. If I have to explain it too much, it is not the place, not the person, not the moment. I do not spend energy convincing. I do not try to change perceptions. I just follow my path. And on that path, silence protects me, focus directs me, and constant execution validates me. Because the man who knows who he is does not argue to prove. He only proves it in each step without noise, without permission, without explanations. The eighth principle that became a cornerstone in my life was valuing temporary invisibility. Because in this world that glorifies exposure, immediate fame, constant recognition, there is a stage almost no one endures. The stage where you are growing, in the shadow, where no one applauds you, where no one asks how you are, where results are not yet visible. That stage where you are sowing with everything, but the world still doesn't notice. And if you lack mental strength, you abandon. Not because you are not advancing, but because there is no echo, no witnesses, no validation. I lived that stage many times. I wrote, worked, disciplined myself, and felt it was all invisible, that no one recognized it, that no one valued it, and a part of me wanted to show, wanted to shout, "Look at me, I am changing," but I learned something that gave me the peace I needed. The tree does not ask the forest for permission to grow. It simply sinks into the earth. In silence, it strengthens its roots, nourishes itself, and when the time comes, it blooms without having told anyone it would. Accepting that temporary invisibility made me invincible. I stopped expecting recognition, stopped seeking glances, stopped depending on applause, and began to enjoy the process, to see each day as an invisible, but cumulative investment, because silent progress has a unique beauty. No one sees it coming, and when it arrives with a force impossible to ignore. It is no longer necessary to announce oneself. The impact speaks for itself, because what was built in silence endures with strength. In that stage, I learned to trust life's rhythms, not to despair over immediate results, to understand that every great project needs incubation, time, repetition, dirty work that is not shown, discipline no one sees. And the more you tolerate that invisibility, the greater your capacity to sustain what comes. Because he who does not know how to grow in the shadow cannot sustain the light. He breaks under pressure, decomposes under tension, because he has no roots, only haste. And here is something you must understand with absolute clarity. You are not failing because no one sees you. You are building, you are not stuck because no one recognizes you. You are developing. You do not need likes, nor views, nor approval. You need to endure, repeat, continue. Even if it hurts, even if it goes unnoticed. Because what is forming inside you in the silence is unbreakable. Today, I bless every stage where no one applauded me, because there I became strong, there I forged character, there I learned to be enough for myself. Because when you learn to be with yourself, without noise, without witnesses, without rewards, that is when you truly know yourself, respect yourself, become unstoppable, not for what you achieve, but for the person you are becoming. Invisible today, but impossible to ignore tomorrow. And it all started by saying nothing, by resisting, by continuing in silence. And that is worth more than 1,000 ovations. The 9th principle that transformed my way of living and deciding was learning to restrain myself, not to react on impulse, not to respond immediately, not to make decisions amid anger, frustration, or pride. Because I discovered that in the pause resides power, that the man who knows how to restrain himself, who does not respond by reflex, who breathes before acting, always has an advantage, not because he is slower, but because he is wiser, because he is not being dragged by his emotions, but guided by his consciousness. For a long time, I reacted to everything. If someone attacked me, I responded. If something frustrated me, I exploded. If something hurt me, I showed it. I lived exposed, without a shield, without a filter. And that weakened me, made me predictable, made me manipulable, because he who does not know how to master his response gives control to everything around him. And that silent uncontrolled distances him from his center, from his peace, from his power, until I understood that not everything deserves a response, that not everything that bothers needs attention, that often the greatest act of strength is to be silent. I began to practice the pause, to observe without reacting, to let the emotion pass before speaking, before deciding, before writing, before closing a door or raising a wall. And I discovered that what seemed urgent almost never is, that what seemed grave dissolves with time, that what seemed an offense is often just a mirror of others' pain. And I learned not to take everything personally, to choose my battles, to give silence where before I gave shouts, to offer distance where before I offered conflict. This habit gave me something no external achievement had given me, internal mastery, because I no longer moved from the emotion of the moment, but from long-term purpose. I was no longer a slave to what I felt. I was the master of how I acted. And that gave me a type of respect that is not asked for, it is imposed. Because people may not understand your silence, but they feel it. They may not share your measured reaction, but they respect it because it transmits authority. An authority that needs no volume, nor aggression, nor explanations, only coherence. Restraint is not repression, it is choice. It is deciding when to speak and when not, when to act and when to observe, when to advance and when to wait. It is using time as an ally, the mind as a filter, the heart as a guide. It is knowing you are not losing by not reacting, you are winning by not betraying yourself. Because every time you react from impulse, you are giving something of yourself away, your focus, your energy, your time. And I am no longer willing to give any of that to those who do not deserve it. Today, I practice restraint as an art, as a form of internal leadership, because he who can be silent when everyone shouts, think when everyone reacts, remain firm when everyone falls, that man does not need to impose himself. His mere calmness is uncomfortable because it shows he is not at the mercy of his surroundings. And that silent, but evident freedom is what makes him different, is what makes him powerful. Because in a world of impulses, he who masters his response masters his destiny. The 10th and most powerful principle that completely transformed me was this, that true power lies in building a life that needs no defense, a life so solid, so coherent, so deep that it requires no justifications, nor explanations, nor exhibitions. A life that makes no noise, but leaves a mark. That does not seek tension, but impacts in silence. That does not depend on applause, because it is built on purpose, discipline, and inner truth. And to get there, I had to learn to be silent, to focus, to execute without asking permission, to sustain myself when no one was looking, to walk when everyone was talking, to resist when no one believed. This is not a philosophy to please. It is a way of living to transcend. And on that path I discovered that the strongest man is not the one who shouts loudest, but the one who can look at everyone in silence and still advance. The one who can endure the discomfort of not being understood, the one who becomes his own source of direction. Because when you choose to live life without unnecessary exposure, when you decide to build with depth instead of speed, when you stop competing with the noise, what emerges is your most powerful version. Your version that no longer needs to prove anything, only to do, only to be. And yes, many will call you cold, distant, selfish, because they will not understand. You're focused because they do not know how to live without sharing each step, because they cannot bear the silence that forces them to look inside. But that is not your problem. Your only responsibility is to your vision, to your soul, to that internal voice that does not shout, but never lies. And when you obey it, when you ally with it and make your life a silent testimony, everything changes, because then you do not need others to believe in you. You already believed, already chose, already acted, and that is all that matters. My life began to turn when I stopped asking for permission, when I started to build without warning, when I turned my process into a personal pact, not a public spectacle. And in that silence I found strength, found peace, found direction. Because silence teaches you to stop looking outside, it forces you to look inside, to order what no one sees, to work on what no one applauds. And that work is what sustains everything, because what is built in silence is not destroyed with words. So if you want to take something from all this, let it be this. You do not need to speak more. You need to act better. You do not need to be seen. You need to be coherent. You do not need to prove anything. You need to fulfill yourself. And for that, you do not need to shout. You need presence. You need focus. You need the decision to make your life a work that speaks for you, even if you never say a word. Because in the end, those who truly change the world are not those who make more noise. They are those who do not stop. They are those who in silence, focus, and execution become unstoppable.